Chapter 11 begins with the great shepherd telling Much Afraid that the next part of her journey will be through the forest of danger and tribulation. And Much Afraid was not very happy to hear that. But the great shepherd encouraged her by saying that he is always with her, even when he isn't there physically, and that nothing will harm her when she's following the path that he has for her. So even though he warns her there is storms, the trees can be tall and can be really dark, that she can rest in the fact that he protects her and she will not come to harm. And the great shepherd also gave her important information for her to follow, which was to not let the fear, that craven fear tries to paint, to not let that seep into her imagination for her to dwell on. Because he warns that if you do that, you will walk in fear and trembling when there's no need for it. And so instead, to focus, using her imagination, to focus on these promises that he has given her and his protection and his peace. And that will help her continue through this time in this forest of danger and tribulation without stumbling. So Much Afraid and sorrow and suffering start the journey through the forest. And it's not long before all 5 of her enemies show up. Craven fear, bitterness, self-pity, resentment, and doubt. And they all take their turn trying to convince Much Afraid to not continue on this path. Much Afraid is not sure what to do, but she gets fed up with listening to them, and she stops with sorrow and suffering and talks to them and asks them, like, what should we do? And sorrow pulls out some gauze, something that can just plug Much Afraid's ears so that she can still hold on to their hands as they walk. So they do this, and after a while, her enemies leave them alone because they realize that she wasn't listening to them anyways. So they carry on, and Much Afraid is amazed that the walk in the forest is actually quite pleasant. Even though she was dreading this, it seemed enjoyable. But then they did begin to hear a storm coming through, like the great shepherd said it usually does. And there was pouring rain and cracks of thunder and lightning as they're walking through. And Much Afraid noticed how she was able to still feel peace and to not be trembling in fear, even though she was walking through the storm, because she was remembering and holding on to those promises that the great shepherd told her, that she wouldn't come to harm. And so they continued on, and as they got a little further, her enemies showed up again. And this time, Much Afraid responded in a new way. She turned to sorrow and suffering and said, "Will you help me throw rocks at craven fear?" And sorrow and suffering laughed for the first time, picked up the rocks, and they hurled them at her enemies until they all disappeared. And shortly after that, or immediately after that, they saw a log hut in the clearing that they were able to go into to escape the storm. And Sorrow locked the door right away because her enemies banged on the door and tried to convince them to let them in. And Much Afraid yelled at them to run down the hill and try to get away from the storm. So in this log hut, Much Afraid, they end up spending 3 days, and Much Afraid gets to know sorrow and suffering a lot better, because they just have this time they're spending together. Much Afraid realizes that she's learning the mountain dialect better, and learns that sorrow is also, that as the journey continues, they are also changing. And sorrow was singing a song and said to Much Afraid that she never knew the song, but on the journey, the mountain dialect was it was coming to her on the journey, and she taught Much Afraid that song. And the chapter ends with Much Afraid walking around the cabin, singing this song, and imagining what it will be like when she does have hinds feet. And that gives a perfect picture of what the great shepherd was instructing her to do, to use her imagination, to focus on his promises and what he has, the truth and what he has told her, instead of the fears that her enemies are trying to give her. And I love this chapter, and especially the fact that they're in the middle of a storm, but it's this perfect resting place and protection that clearly the great shepherd has set out for them. And Much Afraid, it says in the book, in this chapter, that this is the happiest and most peaceful that she has felt on the whole journey so far, even though it's in the middle of the forest of danger and tribulation and in the middle of this storm. And it's just such a beautiful picture of that peace that Christ gives us in the midst of the storm. The first lesson that I took from chapter 11 is that when we trust in the promises of Christ, we can feel his peace in the midst of the storm. So we see how Much Afraid, through the fear of walking through this forest of danger and tribulation, through the storms, thunder and lightning she's walking through, and then in this cabin where there's storms all around her, but she feels the happiest and most peaceful that she's felt at anywhere on this whole journey, including times that she's actually been physically with Christ. She's really experiencing that peace of the great shepherd in the midst of this storm. And that is a big part of her listening to the promises that the great shepherd gave her at the beginning, of focusing on him, of remembering that he is protecting her, that when she's on the path he's sending her on, nothing can harm her. And that helps her to keep going. The second lesson that I took from chapter 11 is that we can defeat the enemy by clinging to and proclaiming the truth, both in our words and our imaginations. This is something we see Much Afraid use all throughout this chapter, and one of the main things that the great shepherd encouraged her to do to help her not to stumble. And so we see this first when she decides to throw rocks at her enemies. To me, that's proclaiming truth. When lies and fear and doubt are coming at us, that we proclaim the truth back at them, and we silence them with that. And with our imaginations, we hold on to the truth and the promises, and it leaves no room for those fear and doubts to overtake our imagination. What we spend our time thinking about, is it causing us to become more fearful, or is it filling us with more faith and joy or peace with what we are focusing on? And so Much Afraid, she does this so well in this chapter. And this is a new thing to her. She proclaims the truth, and then they get in the cabin. And instead of worrying about what she heard her enemies say before, she is focusing on the peace that she has in the provision of this cabin in the midst of the storm. And she learns this song from sorrow about Hinds Feet on a mountain. And then she spends time singing that song and imagining what it will be like when she has hinds feet on the mountain. This is a very big change from her just being stuck thinking, how could it be possible for me to have hinds feet? And now she is fully focusing on that promise and believing it so that she's able to use her imagination to wonder and to be filled with joy and expectation in that. And the third lesson that I took from chapter 11 is that as we learn to see sorrow and suffering as companions, our ability to find beauty in the hard times increases. And this transforms the way that we experience sorrow and suffering. So, for Much Afraid, in this time in the cabin, she all of a sudden realizes that she's beginning to enjoy the company of sorrow and suffering. She's beginning to appreciate them, to see them as friends, and to really be thankful for their companionship. And it shows that just this transformation, right, that Much Afraid has had, from not looking at them to talking to them just when she needs to freely asking them for help, to now spending time with them in conversation and singing and learning from them, and them, learning from her. And also there's understanding from this chapter then that sorrow and suffering are changing as well, as Much Afraid changes her relationship with them. And as they continue on this journey, sorrow and suffering are transforming somehow as well. And so this is so important because, for us in our own lives, when we can see the experience of sorrow and suffering as a companion, not that we're happy that it's happening, but as a way of being closer to Christ and a magnifier of the different things that are beautiful in life, it changes our view of suffering and sorrow. And that transforms how we engage with life and the strength we have in trials. So these are the lessons that I took from chapter 11, and I look forward to going through the next chapter with you.